G'day folks, so this is a follow-up to the initial video that I did exploring Vienna Ensemble Pro using Bitwig, and I think I'm settling for the time being on a workflow to use VEP in an efficient way based on the way Bitwig routes and handles things. So this is my plan moving forward. Bitwig has this concept of track groups, which also end up becoming buses. This idea of having a folder or a group is synonymous with having a bus. So normally in Bitwig, when you have an instrument track or an audio track inside of a group, the audio will automatically be routed through to the parent group, the immediate parent. That one will then go to its immediate parent, because you can have nested groups and folders, until it works its way up to the master bus. Of course, you can override that on any given track by manually selecting the destination. So if I had an audio track here and I put it inside this group, I can, instead of routing it to the parent group, because it says the name of the parent group in this case is VEP strings, so it automatically has routed it to VEP strings and then master. But I can actually just change that if I want to. If I wanted to, I could just send it straight to master, or I could even hardwire it into one of the return tracks, which wouldn't make any sense. But Bitwig is flexible that way. So what happens to an instrument track? Normally the instrument track by default will have, an instrument track will have a virtual instrument. So the virtual instrument will be emitting audio. And so that audio will basically follow the same rules as discussed. It will go to the parent track. It would look like this. So let me just actually create one. So if I create an instrument track, and let me just use some kind of default Bitwig instrument, FM4, for instance. So now MIDI will be coming in and audio will be coming out. And if we look at the default routing, it's gone straight to master track. If I drop this instrument into the group, it will go to the VEP strings bus and then onto the master. So an instrument track has exactly the same rules as an audio track by default. So what happens to the MIDI if the MIDI goes straight through? It's inconsequential. It's not the default behavior. So I guess Bitwig just drops the MIDI data to the floor if indeed there is MIDI data still being emitted at the end of the signal chain. What we want to do is we want to have an individual Bitwig track, which is synonymous with a Vienna Ensemble instrument track. So it is relevant to us. So we don't want the MIDI dropped to the floor. So instead, what I think is a good idea is to create an individual instrument track in Bitwig for each instrument that you want to control in VEP. And then manually, Bitwig gives you the option of sending notes to tracks in the destination. So I can hardwire an instrument track in Bitwig to go to, in this case, the group track destination. So now the MIDI is specifically being sent to the group. And the crazy thing is in Bitwig, you know how I said groups are also buses? I can actually add a virtual instrument to the quote unquote bus. I can add a virtual instrument to the group track. And so there is something there to actually receive the MIDI that's being sent from the individual tracks below that group. So in this case, obviously it's going to be the VEP client virtual instrument. And it's important that the default remain the same here. So it's going to receive all channels. This track is going to be able to receive MIDI from all channels, and it will pass that on to VEP. Now, if we go over to VEP, I've basically got two MIDI channels here for simplicity. So I've got this virtual instrument here, decent sampler, accepting input on MIDI port 1, channel 1. And then I've also got this, Fujara flute instrument, accepting input on the same channel. So I'm going to send VEP one set of notes, and it's going to use two instruments to play the same notes. So I'm doing that to illustrate a point, which we'll get to shortly. And then, of course, I've got another instrument here, which is on MIDI channel 2 for demonstration purposes as well. So how do we route the MIDI data to these instruments in VEP from Bitwig? So like I said before, we'll create an individual track because this is how we want to be able to manage things in our sequencer. This is how we want to have an interface to controlling those tracks. We want to be able to create a separate part using the arranger window and have a track for each part. And in some case, we can have multiple tracks going to the same instrument, which is great if you want to separate things out, depending on the virtual instrument that's receiving it in VEP. So this is how we set up an individual track. I'll start with channel 1. So the first thing you need to do is insert your track inside of the group where you're going to put the VEP virtual instrument. Oh, and by the way, it goes without saying that I'm going to create a group for every instance. So if I go into VEP and I create another instance, let's call this brass. So we've got strings and we've got brass. I think you can change colors. Set color. Let's just pick a different color. Okay. So now we've got strings and brass. Okay. 2 different instances each with their own channels and virtual instruments. So if I was going to legitimately do that, let's just say I create another track here for brass. Let's create a MIDI instrument, and it's going to be a blank instrument. If you click the plus sign here, Bitwig kind of forces you to pick an instrument, but I don't want to do that. So I just right click and I go add instrument or Control T, and it's just now added a blank track ready to have an instrument. So what I'll do is I'll highlight that track. I'll press Control G, which will put it into a group for me. And then I will call this VEP brass. And I will add, what am I looking at here? I will add a Vienna Ensemble Pro connector, virtual instrument, and I will connect it to brass. Okay, so now the VEP is installed on the group channel, on the group track. I'm going to reserve the word channel for VEP so we're not getting too confused. So on the group track in Bitwig, I'm going to insert the virtual instrument that will send and receive data from VEP for that instance. So in this case, the instance is brass. So now I can presumably add an instrument part, which will be good for brass. Let's actually do something. Let's copy this one for some reason. I don't know why I'm doing that, but let's just do that. I think there's a bunch of key switches here, which I'll just delete for this copy. So now we've got something on the brass track. Let's just color code these similarly to what we had. Let's make all these sort of similar green and make these blue. Just hold it. Okay, cool. So now we've got strings looking blue and brass looking green. And so I could then so the other thing that I need to do to set up this brass track is not only check that it's going to, you see over here, this is like a waveform thing. So this is not what we want. We want it to go to send notes to tracks. So we need to go to the group track and the device that's on the group track, the MIDI aspect of the group track. So that's what we've got to select. So now it's sending MIDI to VEP brass, and VEP brass is going to master. So that's what that's all about there. But the other thing that we need to do is we need to go into VEP and we need to check the channel that we're using. So in the brass instance, we don't have any channels at the moment, but let's add one now. So if I create a synchron player that has, here we go, some brass, players light. Okay, and we've got some brass in there, and that's listening on channel 1. So it's very important for us to do 2 things to ensure the MIDI is heading to the right place. Number 1 is we need to check the notes in here. So with Bitwig, you can actually tell a clip that to default all of the notes. When you create new notes, send it to a particular channel. So I want all new notes to go to channel 1. But also I've got to check the notes that are currently here and make sure that they're all going to channel 1. Because I might have a clip event which says it's going to channel 1, but then I can have notes. I can actually have notes which are going to other channels. So MIDI channel management is obviously really important with outsourcing your processing power to VEP. You've got to really be on the ball with that and check it, because it's really easy to make mistakes and then you're wondering why an instrument's not playing and all this sort of stuff. Now, if I wanted to use my controller, my MIDI controller, and press record here and have those notes go to, we'll just call this brass for now. And I'm going to call this instrument dimension brass. Okay, that's a bit better. It's actually important to keep on top of your naming as well as your MIDI ports. Okay, so now if I want this to be able to route input from my MIDI controller, it's important to make sure that it's sending it to the right channel. So this is where you do it. So in this case, channel 1 it will actually work because this is where dimension brass is sitting. But let's just say if I move this to say channel 5, I would need to come in here and set this to channel 5. And now when I play my controller, it should actually start playing back from VEP. All right, so that's working. Now, if I was on channel 5, guess what? I'd have to make sure that all these notes are going to channel 5, which I will temporarily do just for the sake of the exercise. So now if I was to play back this MIDI, okay, that works. But of course, we're not on channel 5, so I'm just going to put this back to channel 1. Put this back to channel 1. I'm going to go back to here, and I'm going to put that back to channel 1. That's set up out of the way. The other thing that I wanted to talk about today was automation. There are 2 ways, generally speaking, that you can do automation with VEP. You can either just send MIDI controller data directly to the instrument. This dynamics thing is already set to CC1. So that's change control channel CC1. So if I go back to Bitwig, let's see how we're automating something. Okay, so you can see here I've got MIDI channel 1, CC1. And if I was to play this back, okay, so we should see this moving up and down as I play from Bitwig, and that's not happening. Why is that not happening? Oh my God. I see what happened there. Okay, so here's the lesson. You got to make sure that the destination is MIDI is under notes to tracks like this one is. I couldn't figure out why the hell I was getting nothing. It's because this was sending it to the right name, but to the wrong type. So it was sending it here instead of here. Now it'll work. Okay. God, that took ages. All right. And then everything will work up here. Okay. So now that we have everything working again, I wanted to talk about automation. Yes, let's talk about automation. So there are basically 2 ways you can automate your virtual instruments. The first way is the standard MIDI control change. And oh my God, there's so many levels of channels. There's the channel in VEP for the instrument, and then there's the MIDI channel, the MIDI port, then the MIDI channel, and then the control change channel. So many layers. Now, one of the things can get confusing for people who are new at this. If you're new to MIDI or you're new to production, there's a way to send instructions via MIDI that aren't notes. So you've got note data and then you've got control change data. So control change is used for various things like your mod wheel. So when you move the mod wheel on your MIDI controller, it will send control change channel number 1 down whatever MIDI channel you're using. And usually that's done to change what they call expression. In this case, it's been called dynamics. But if I right click here, I can see CC number 1. So that's how come I know that the mod wheel will change that, because mod wheel defaults to CC1. All right, we can automate this using CC1 automation from Bitwig, and Bitwig's automation is under this little button here. If you look here, you can see that I've actually set some automation for channel 1. The way to access that in Bitwig is to click the drop list and you can go add a MIDI lane. And then when you go add a MIDI lane, you've got to first of all select your channel. Very important, easy to miss. So you click, you can click on here and then drag it up and down to change the channel. And then underneath, you've got to get the correct number, which in my case is number 1. So I want CC1, so control change is what CC stands for. So CC1 on MIDI channel 1, okay? I know it sounds like I'm really belaboring the accuracy of how to address things, but you can't lose track or you'll end up just wasting time wondering why stuff isn't working. So anyway, so now if I double click and I start the track here, you can see that the UI for this instrument is reflecting the changes being sent on CC1. Okay, now there's another way to send stuff, and that's basically changing parameters. So if I bring up, press F5 to bring up the parameters thing. If I want to add a parameter here, I can click on learn, which is what the L stands for, and then I can just drag something, and then it should actually update that magically. But sometimes it doesn't. So forget that. Just right click and go MIDI learn. Anyway, this is assigned CC1. I'm not going to remove it because I can't add it manually. So yeah, I have to now send CC1 in order for this to learn CC1. So let me do it. Okay. So if I add another track here and I say, actually this is not the one. I need to go into here. I go add MIDI lane, and then I say, give me control change number 2, breath control. All right. On MIDI channel 1. Okay. And so now if I make some changes there on CC2, hit play. Yeah, there we go. That's learnt. So that's how you do it when your MIDI controller doesn't work properly. Yeah, you can just send some automation data by manually creating it like I just did. But I'm going to delete that because I don't need it and set the attack down to whatever it was before. Okay, where was I? So I was going to say that you can change parameters. Okay, so if we look at this parameter here, synchron player velocity crossfade. If I look here and I press play again, okay, we can see that this is changing CC1, which is to be expected. All right, they're not playing any notes, so it's just here for illustration purposes. I'm going to add another parameter here under automation parameters for VEP. I'm going to click L, and then I'm just going to change the timbre adjust. Okay, so now you see how when I drag this up and down, you can see this faint line being dragged up and down here. Let's go learn a new one and then do the timbre adjusting again. All right, okay, so parameter 3, okay, when I change this, you should be able to see it changed over here on the virtual instrument. Now this is not using MIDI CC, this is using parameter change, okay? Now the reason why these are communicating back and forth with each other is because I have the track selected which contains the actual VEP client. Okay, so the problem with trying to control VEP from a MIDI track which does not have the VEP client on it is that it can't communicate back and forth with it. So if I go and move this parameter here, Bitwig's not detecting any movement from this track because this track doesn't have the VEP virtual instrument on it. Okay, so I'm not getting parameter 3 coming across. So this is the only gotcha if you're setting it up in Bitwig the way that I'm setting it up, is having the, if you really need to access a parameter that you can't control with the MIDI CC, then you actually have to go up and select the group track and then, move the parameter around, and then you can automate it. But arguably, it will just become a bit confusing if all of your automations are living on the group track. And so like now if I want to go and automate, what is this timbre adjust? If I want to automate timbre adjust without using a MIDI CC, then that's just going to be a bit inconvenient because I'm looking at the track down here just going, oh, I have to go up to its parent group in order to be able to access the graph for timbre adjust. I'm not sure when you're going to be in a situation where you can't use a MIDI CC, but that will be up to the virtual instrument itself. So in this case, I can see right here that, sure, I can access this if I use MIDI CC8. So it's actually not really a problem. I can just delete parameter 3 and I can just go down to the correct sync strings Bitwig MIDI track that I dedicated for that virtual instrument, and then I can just manually go and say add a MIDI lane and then just give me number 8. Here we go. Oh, sorry, channel 1, CC number 8. Okay, well, I'll just ignore the default general MIDI name that's given to CC8, and now I know because CC8 is going to be sent to timbre adjust. Okay, so now if I go in and I just create some, let's double click here, just create some changes, and I hit play. Okay, it's not sending the CC data through for some reason. Maybe I need to go and add it here. This is really annoying. Once you add a parameter, you can't remove it without clearing the whole lot, which is just stupid. Anyway, so yeah, it's not allowing to remove that. Okay, what's the issue here? So channel 1, CC8 should be, oh, is this channel 1? No, this is channel 2. I got it wrong. That's why it's not working. Right, okay, so that's why that's not working. I'm gonna delete that one. I'm gonna have to go and add it again. So this time, channel 2, CC8. See why you have to be anally retentive about this stuff. Otherwise, shit just doesn't work and then you get frustrated. Like just happened to me just then. Alrighty, so play. Now that'll work. What a surprise. All right. So my takeaway advice from all of this is to always try and use MIDI CCs rather than rely on this other parameter nonsense. Just be super careful about making sure that you're addressing the target to the right place. So you have to get the MIDI channel right, channel 2 in this case, and you have to get the CC number right. The cool thing about the Synchron player is you can literally, you don't even have to click learn or anything. You can just click on a number here and you can just go directly to that number, assign any number that you want to one of these controllers, and then just make sure that the numbers match up on this side. With other virtual instruments, your mileage may vary. So in my case, I had to just create an automation for a CC that wasn't in use yet, and then click on learn, and then the virtual instrument then took on the CC that I'd previously automated. So it's just a little trick, but you can just get away with using CCs for all of your automation. And that's all I wanted to talk about in this video. So thanks for listening.